So, 2025. We've heard a ton of talk about the US economy, right? But what's really going on? To figure that out, we're going to cut through all the noise and the headlines and look directly at the government's own report cards. The official data on jobs, prices, and growth to see what they're actually telling us. Let's kick things off with the claim that really shaped the whole conversation this year. After a third quarter that was, frankly, surprisingly strong, President Trump declared that a new economic golden age was here. And that, right there, became the narrative, an economy that was absolutely roaring back to life. And that really gets to the heart of what we're digging into here. When you step back from the big pronouncements and actually look at the underlying numbers, the nitty-gritty data on jobs, on prices, on growth, does it all add up to a golden age? Or is the picture just a little more complicated than that? All right, first up, the cost of living. This was a massive deal during the 2024 campaign, so let's see what the numbers actually showed in 2025. What did it really cost to live in America this year? A huge campaign promise was to bring prices down, not just slow them down, but actually lower them. But the data from 2025 shows that inflation pretty much held firm. This created a real tension because while the White House was promising lower prices, a lot of economists were looking at its policies, like big tariffs on imports, and worrying they'd actually do the exact opposite and push prices even higher. So this all led to a pretty public showdown over interest rates. In one corner, you had the White House pushing hard for the Federal Reserve to just slash rates and supercharge economic growth. But in the other corner, you had Fed Chair Jerome Powell and his team saying, whoa, not so fast. They were taking a much more careful approach, worried that if they cut rates too quickly, it could completely wipe out all the tough progress made against inflation. It's that classic battle, short-term boost versus long-term stability. Okay, so what did all this mean for the average American worker? The administration was promising a huge surge in jobs, this new manufacturing renaissance. But did that renaissance ever actually show up in 2025? Well, the reality is, by the time we even got to 2025, that big hiring boom we saw after the pandemic, it was already running out of gas. That promised renaissance, the major wave of new manufacturing jobs, it just hadn't materialized. And you could really see the labor market starting to struggle over the summer. The economy actually lost jobs in both June and August. Then another 105,000 jobs disappeared in October. And no surprise, with jobs going down, the unemployment rate started to tick up, eventually hitting its highest point in over 4 years. So, the official number that the Bureau of Labor Statistics put out for November was 4.6%. And this specific number, well, it became a huge flashpoint. Because the president himself came out and publicly challenged the government's own number, claiming the real figure was 4.5% and blaming the media for getting it wrong. So right there, you see this growing gap between the official data and how the administration was framing it. Okay, so the administration's argument was that the only reason unemployment was up was because of a shrinking federal workforce. But did the numbers actually back that up? Let's look. Since January, the federal workforce dropped by 271,000, okay? But in that same time, the total number of unemployed Americans went up by 1 million. So yeah, those federal cuts were part of it for sure, but they're clearly not the whole story. All right, so what about the big picture? Let's talk about gross domestic product, GDP, the main way we measure economic growth. And if the jobs and inflation numbers were kind of messy, the GDP story for 2025 was, well, it was a total roller coaster. Man, the ride through 2025 was anything but steady. The year kicked off with the economy actually shrinking in the first quarter, only to bounce right back in the second. And then, boom, a really strong, honestly unexpected third quarter. This kind of up and down volatility makes it pretty hard to spot a clear, stable trend. And, this gets at a really important point, something we've seen before. Just because that big headline GDP number looks good, it doesn't always mean people feel like things are good in their day-to-day lives. If prices are still high and the job market feels a little shaky, a great GDP report can feel totally disconnected from your reality. Getting the growth number up is one thing. Making people feel it is a whole other challenge. All right, so let's pull all these threads together. After looking at prices, jobs, and growth, what's the final report card on the U.S. economy in 2025, according to the government's own numbers? When you lay out all the official stats, the picture you get is of an economy really at a crossroads. Inflation, it's stuck around. The job market, it definitely cooled off, and unemployment went up. And GDP growth, it was all over the place, not that steady boom that was promised. So based on this data, those foundations for a so-called golden age, they look a little shaky. And so all of this leaves us with one big lingering question. You've got the official data telling one story, and you've got this presidential sentiment telling a totally different one. When those two things are so far apart, what's the real state of the economy? Is it what the numbers say, or is it how people feel? Honestly, that's the debate that's probably going to define the year ahead.